So good afternoon, everyone. It's probably morning in Europe, but early afternoon in Israel. I'm happy to have you here all for the presentation by Professor Amos Bouskila from the University of Ben-Gurion of the Negev, Department of Life Sciences. And Amos did his first and second degrees in Jerusalem, the third degree in University of California, Davis, and he did a postdoc in Vancouver, beautiful Vancouver. What is he has one leg in the field. He was the first director of the Israel Reptile Information Center. This means that he established it, was a main actor in establishing it. Interesting enough, he studies the use of game theory to understand relations between predators and prey in natural system. So now, prisoner's dilemma in the animal kingdom, and so on. But I would like to say thank you to Amos. Invite you to inquire more via email on Ma'avarim and the projects that we are doing for promotion of PhD students. And now I invite you, Amos, to take the lead and to deliver your presentation on effective presentation. Thank you very much, Amos.
Thank you, David, and I hope that you will find this presentation effective. And just a minute. So today's outline are going to be what are the goals of presentation? What are we talking about? And then I'll give you a little sample talk that I recorded. And I would like you to identify good or bad points with your intuition before we even talk about the principles that I'm going to talk later. I would like to see what your intuition brings you to list in this list. And then we will talk a little bit about theory, what have cognitive scientists found, and then how do we employ their findings, and some solutions to common problems when you try to give your presentations. So when I'm talking about what are we talking about, just so that we know, I'm talking about student seminar presentation, candidate seminar presentation, job talks, if you have to present a talk at a conference, or generally if you are teaching, and part of your teaching is obviously to deliver presentations to your audience. I specifically not talking about lecturing through Zoom. This is what I'm showing you now is a lecture that I've been delivering for many years now, and it's about presenting. You stand on a stage in front of a screen behind you, and you have to imagine, I know it's been a year that we haven't seen these kind of lectures, but hopefully, and we will get back to this normal type of lecturing sometime soon. So I'm talking about the lecture with audience, live audience. So we will start with this practical work. I hope that you have a piece of paper next to you and a pen or pencil. And obviously there are many, many styles. I see talks and I say, wow, I could give this, I could bring it to my audience and show them, but it's not so nice to shame other people. So I'm going to use one of my talk when I was a bit younger, and your task is to try and list what you feel is annoying or not efficient or something that is not contributing to effective presentation. And if you find some positive points in the lecture, that will be good too.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me and for the nice presentation. So I am Amos Bouskila from Ben-Gurion University, and I'm going to talk about foraging modes of small predators and their implications. And the structure of today's talk is going to be, I'm going to explain what are foraging modes, provide examples of different foragers, flexibility in foraging mode, energetic issues of foraging mode, previous view of probabilities of catching prey, the model, evolution of the feeding apparatus, and experiments to test the model. And early development in the foraging theory decided that we have two foraging modes. One is active foraging, and the second is ambush foraging, sit and wait. But in recent time, we discovered that there are in-between animals. So this is one extreme animal, widely foraging, and this one is a sit and wait animal, and this one is somewhere in between, and the geckos keep changing between the two different time foraging modes. So we discovered there is flexibility in foraging mode. Some species or taxons show flexibility in the foraging modes between active foragers and sit and wait foragers. And there used to be a heated debate on continuity. Are they two separate modes or a continuum? All this is obsolete now when we see the flexibility. So the most important questions in the discipline of foraging modes are, something is wrong with your thoughts on this computer. Never mind. So we'll move on. We have this table of energetic consideration, and what I want you to see is just this line here. Ignore all the rest. I know it looks frightening. So we're talking about the Gerbilus alembii and its mass 22.8 and energetics 35.6, and it is a rodent that we want to compare to the reptiles that we're talking about, and it is a granivorous animal. And so this is the representation of this equation, H equals C plus P plus MOC. And you can say that it has a very unique shape and very interesting equation. However, we want to deal with the foraging, and for this we have the equation Z equals 2Rn V squared plus S squared to the root, to the power of a half. And so you were wondering what are the parameters. So R is the perceptual radius of predators, M is predator density, V is predator speed, and S is prey speed. And where you think about the expression for R, it's Pt divided by P, optimal plus 1 minus P, and all the rest. And when we look at a beetle and we think what it's doing in the winter, yes, you guessed it. They sleep during the winter, and so there is no foraging during the winter. And for this, we use the model to understand the principles. And so we have the prey, the predator, and the second predator, and the foraging. What do you say? I'm short on time. Okay, no problem. This is not so important. This is not so important. And so the conclusion from the model is the disadvantage of ambush predator is reduced when prey moves directionally. Obviously, there is no situation in which ambushing is advantageous over active foraging. Directional movement of animals may be in part explained by a game situation. And already Darwin said, when we see any structure highly perfected for any particular habit, as the wings of a bird for flight, we should bear in mind that animals displaying early transitional rates of the structure will seldom have survived to the present day, for they will have been supplanted by their successors. Origin of the Species, Charles Darwin, 1859, 6th edition, chapter 6. Nobody could say it better. And here are the structure that he was talking about. Yes, I'm going on. And let's now hit the nail on the head with the example of our study that we did on this snake. And we put it in enclosures. Oops, it came about a little bit dark, but doesn't matter. Yes, the camera was not very functional on the day that I took this picture, but it's a very important picture so that you see the ideal structure of this, of the enclosure of this study. And we used measures for foraging mode, we used percentile moving, and then we used moves per minute, MPM, and then we used also move duration, which is percentile moving divided by MPM, and we put all this in a structure because we needed only 2 out of the 3 parameters, and these are the results. Yes, I know, okay. So the conclusion, foraging modes are connected to many aspects in the ecology of predators. an additional tool to assess how animals view the world, and we need to study them more. And I would like to thank my lab members, Alona Baki, Aviad Bar, Pablo Blinder, Rami Buchnik, Jackie Falach, Chagai Haled, Dror Avlena, Hadas Avlena, Einat Norman, Tami Peled, Alom Reichman, Hila Shamir, Melissa Schick, Eric Summer, and Irit Div. And I want to thank you. And if you have any questions.
Okay, we are back now to reality, and I hope that you made a list of the points. Keep them nearby. We're going to use them later. But before, I want to discuss a few issues, like more related to kind of what are the goals of presentation? Why are we giving a presentation? This is an essential part to understanding the concept that I'm trying to present here in this talk. So there are two options. One is you just want to present your information, pour the information, I don't know what for, and you've delivered it, so you've done your task. On the other hand, you might want to use cognitive guidance. In Hebrew, it would be translated to tfisa munchet, where we want to make a difference. It's not just that we want to deliver it, we want people to get something from it, and more than one thing. So if we're talking about cognitive, what are we talking about? Cognition, it's a list of mental processes like attention, memory, understanding language, solving problems, making decisions. Why do we need cognitive guidance when we are delivering a presentation? We may want people to understand, like if we're teachers, we want them to understand what we're talking, or if we are in a seminar, we want people to know what we've been doing, so it's important they understand. We also may want them to remember. In all cases that I told you before, even if you are giving a presentation, a job talk, you want people to remember what you are doing and what you are describing. You may want to get feedback from the audience. So if you give a seminar or in a conference, you want to induce interactions with the audience during the talk, maybe after the talk or at the break. So you must use tools that will assist people to be able to understand, remember, and think about it and interact with you. So if we want guidance, we need to be effective, and we have to be consistent with the way that people learn or absorb things from what they hear in the talk. And so what have cognitive scientists found that we can use? So they tell us that people who listen, they have, first of all, limited capacity. And we have to realize this and not count on the fact that whatever we say they will absorb. No, there's a limit. They can operate dual channels, visual and verbal, at the same time. And in fact, it's actually useful and helpful for the absorption if they operate both channels. And they need active processing. So it's not just sitting passively like you sit in front of the TV, but active processing means that they need all the time to try and think about what you are talking about. So let's analyze this. And how do we employ the findings? So if we have listeners that have limited capacity, what we need to learn to do from this is, first of all, limit the information that we present. Then, most important is to remove irrelevant parts. If there is a limited capacity, why to take some of this capacity on things that are not really important or relevant? And also to minimize distractions, because capacity is limited. So let's go over some of the points that I wrote to myself when I watched this all the talk. And if you have a list in front of you, then you can mark in your list if this was included in what I'm talking about. So we are dealing first with limited capacity, and we want to limit the information presented. So when you put too much in a talk, so this was the structure of the talk, of this imaginary talk that I provided, this is too much for a presentation, so many different things, And maybe one should consider to talk about fewer points. And whenever there is a slide, the slide should be also limited in the amount of information that it provides. If there is so much information in one slide, this is sometimes overwhelming to the people who are listening and or trying to view and see what's happening in the slide. And it is much better to split it into shorter slides, shorter sentences, something that people can absorb. And if there are equations, most people, unless they are from the Department of Mathematics or Physics and so on, it's difficult for them to see long equations, especially that they are not properly explained. So they should be simplified in some way that it will be easier for the people, for the listener to absorb, and not just to say, wow, he's great, he can read long equations, right? So if you want them to understand the equation, it should be dealt with in a different manner that I'm going to exemplify in a few minutes. Removing irrelevant parts. So you have to think about what in your presentation is not needed that you say. For example, you were just presented. You don't need to say your name again. Hi, my name is Amos Bouskila. Somebody presented you. So it's a tendency that speakers, especially students, I think, they like to start, they feel confident to start with something they know. They know their name, so they start with the name, but it's really unnecessary when somebody just presented you 2 seconds ago. And if they read your title again, no need to read the title again. And if you present the structure of today's talk, it is good. It's a good practice. But it is so detailed, then people cannot get anything out of it. So whatever the structure of the title is, try to minimize it to some fewer points that a listener can absorb. And you don't really need to provide every step in your talk. If there are large tables, I mean, this is a farce. This is really happening a lot in many of the talks that I hear. People are presenting a huge table and they just want us to see a little data in there, little datum in there. So why don't they just copy it and put it large so that we see what we need and not just be overwhelmed by a huge table that is not necessarily. And in general, using small fonts is really against you because people don't see it and it's useless. So if you want to present it, make it large, make it visible, and just concentrate on the points that you really want to deliver. So there might be some issues that are irrelevant, not so important, and then the speaker just moved on and say, okay, this is not important, this is not important. So why did you show it to start with if it was not important? And I think that we should avoid distracting people by all kinds of animation. Somehow I see it very common among the students. They think it's cute to have a little image doing something, repeating itself. And I think it is so distracting. And people are looking and trying to think, what's the connection between this and what he's talking about? And then they don't hear what you actually want to say. And things like, okay, so you have to acknowledge this is really important. Many people have contributed to your studies and to your work, funding, and so on. But you don't really need to read them one by one. You've written it and you say thank you, and that's it. People can see it, and people who are looking to check if they were included in the acknowledgement, they can see it by themselves. You don't have to waste time and go and read all the names. So we are in the issue of minimizing distraction. So unusual hairdo, this can sounds funny, but for example, if you go and present a seminar in an audience that know you, like the students in your, students or the faculty in your department, and suddenly on that day you come with a totally different and bizarre hairdo, everybody is going to be distracted by the hairdo. Is this really him? Why can the name change his hairdos? It makes him so different. And they don't really concentrate on what you're saying, because every time and again they look at it and say, I can't believe it's him, it looks so different, and so on. So it's time to come with the normal way that you are. It doesn't matter what you have. If normally you have a cuckoo outside in the back, that's fine. That's your normal appearance, just not to add something that is totally distracting. Clothing can be distracting if it is something, again, that is not normally that you are wearing. This can be distracting. I remember going to a conference where I saw one of the people that I knew from in the field and other opportunities, and usually goes with simple clothing as all of us. And suddenly he came to give his talk with a suit and tie and everything. And it was, everybody around it was normal, not, but it was so exceptional that I couldn't listen to his talk, because all the time I said, why it's so different with his suit and tie and so on. It is distracting. And the same, some clothing can be very attractive, and it can be distracting if you have very attractive clothing and so on. So think about it when you choose what you're going to wear. Another element that can be difficult for people to absorb, some people, they have a lecture that is ready in English, the slides are in English, and then they want to deliver it to an audience where they're supposed to talk in Hebrew. And sometimes they're lazy, they don't have the time, and so they show the text in English, but they talk in Hebrew. This is very distracting. This is very difficult for people, even though they understand Hebrew, but they see the titles in English and they try to think, and it's complicated. And because they have limited capacity, you don't want to add additional pressure. You want people to be easily driven into the direction that you want to take into your talk, and not make their mind busy with all kinds of side issues. And the jerky pointer, that's also something that can distract a lot. I don't know, you might have noticed during this talk that all the time the pointer was trying to point the words that are read. Why do people need to point at the word that they're reading? People can listen and see the words if you want to read them. Better, as we will talk yesterday, that you don't read word by word, but that's a different issue. But the pointer, sometimes even people point to a graph, or they point to something that they have written. They want to emphasize a word, so they have to turn around and point pointer, and then the audience, and they use the pointer as an excuse for not looking at the audience, but as looking at the screen. And you can replace it. You don't really have to use this red dot on the pointer. You can use arrows. If you want to point to something on a graph, you can have an arrow that emerges when you press the button. Or if you want to emphasize certain words, you can circle them when you press the next slide, and so on. So with a little bit of imagination, you can prevent and minimize most of the time that people have to turn around and show the back of their head to the audience and talk to the screen instead of talking to the audience. So jerky pointers, sometimes people are holding the pointer and they don't hold it stable, maybe a bit press and so on. So this is to show the pointer and emphasizing all your nervousness, which we're going to talk eventually at the end about nervousness. But a pointer emphasizes sometimes this by the jerky movements, and it's a distraction. It's a distraction to all the audience. But sometimes there's also the person himself or herself. They are jerky. They are moving from side to side on the screen. They move to the left. It is very distracting. I had a teacher at the Hebrew University who used to talk like a Roman general. He would walk like this, and from side to side of the blackboard, and talk to us all the time like this, and hit with a stick on the ground. It was so distracting. I don't remember much of what he said. I just remember the way he talked, which was very distracting. And the next thing that is so easy to fall into this trap is a PowerPoint pyrotechnic. Okay, so the people who created pyrotechnic or created the PowerPoint, they were thinking about a different type of presentation. Sometimes I see this presentation in movie when you see in big companies and somebody has to show off, and so they're using all kind of pyrotechnic that is embedded inside of PowerPoint. But the fact that it's in PowerPoint, we don't have to use it. We want an effective presentation, not a show-off, not a shiny presentation. Whenever you see things that are growing with time, they are coming, and they are distracting, they are slowly, they waste your time, and we want the time to move forward efficiently and not just wait for the next picture to open up or for the text to jump and so on. So the next point in this list was listeners operate dual channel, visual and verbal. So we should take advantage of the fact that we know we have the listener, they have two channels that are ready to absorb what we're going to say. So it would be good if we use this. So we provide information not just by words, but also by images. And I think that in sciences, it is in the quantitative sciences, it is much more common than in some other disciplines where people stand and give a whole talk without any presentation or any images. And I really don't know how they do it. For me, it is very difficult to listen to such talks, but maybe once you learn all your life like this, then you get used to it. Anyway, when we have a presentation, we have the ability to use both images and words. We should make the best out of it. We should provide them simultaneously and not show the equation on one slide and the parameters on the other slide and so on. So we have to put them in the same slide so that people can listen and see at the same time. It is good to show pictures of organisms that are mentioned or described. It would be better to describe them with the names, either the common name or the scientific name, but it's not enough to say it. It would be better that it's actually written next to the picture. And then if people lose you for a second, then they can always see what's written under them. And so you have both channels engaged in understanding what are you talking about. And when you have a bad picture, okay, so on that day, your camera didn't work, fine. Even though it's an important, nobody can really see it, just don't show it. Find another solution, make a drawing, I don't know what, but it's useless to show something that is not clear and people have to struggle. What do I see there? And especially that the speaker claimed that it's a very important structure of the enclosure and nobody could see anything. So don't let the viewer struggle. And so often I see people putting small little images of the whatever they want to show, like the organism that they were talking about. They show little images that it's difficult to see what's going on. If a person is struggling on a small image, he or she cannot listen to what you are talking because they're concentrated about trying to decipher what's going on there. Okay, there are graphs. This was, of course, a little joke, but whenever you present a graph, you have to read the axis. People cannot quickly enough look and see what all the axes are, and they have to understand what's going on there. And it's not enough just to show a graph and move on if you don't have time. If you don't have time, reduce the amount of things that you have to say. But whatever you're saying, try to say effectively. So we were talking about providing two channels simultaneously. So obviously, if you are listing parameters of an equation, they should be in the same frame and not in different frames. And better yet, if you have an equation like this, if you can put it in words and arrows, I find it much more acceptable and easier for people to understand. Again, I'm saying that I know that mathematicians and physicians people who deal with physics and some other discipline, engineering, for them, equations, it's like breathing air and it's very simple and no problem. But for the rest of the people, and I'm talking normally to biologists, ecologists, who need equation. We have a lot of models and so on in our disciplines, but it's not, it's not the main thing that occupies us. And so very long equations can be very difficult for people to absorb, especially if you're talking to a general audience, that some people there are not used to see equations. And so it can help to provide the name of the parameters next to it. Better yet is if you can use words for very simple equations, like this equation here, you can say harvest rate equals energy cost plus predation risk plus missed opportunity cost. This is easier for people to absorb than to try and translate letters to words. Of course, if you have longer, more complicated equation, you cannot do it. This is why equations were invented. But sometimes when you provide a very simple equation, you can help people absorb it if you can. Okay, so next point was that listeners need active processing. So we should assist them by providing things that are easy to process in the mind, and they're not just sitting passively. So if we provide our lecture, our talk in an organized and coherent structure, then it makes it easy on people to absorb it. So the 3 points that I want to make here: organized and coherent structure, integration with prior knowledge, if they have something relevant, and especially conversational style, not formal reading. We'll give some examples for this. So to organize a coherent structure, to give an outline of the talk is useful, because it gives people the framework. Where are we going to? Sometimes people even write it on the top all the time so that everybody knows where we are. Are we in the introduction? Are we in the discussion? And so on. So, but it has to be brief. It cannot be so long as it was presented in this sample talk. And there should be some logical sequence of topics. And to make the sequence logical, I suggest to use something that I mentioned. Some of you might have been present in the talk that I gave a couple of months ago about creative writing techniques. So I described there how to work with a bubble diagram, that you write your ideas and you connect them with you connect the bubbles with arrows in the most logical way. And so this applies not only to writing an introduction to your paper, also to make it that it will be the most logical sequence of topics. And it is important to help people by providing this structure that makes sense. So integrate with prior knowledge is important, especially in teaching, when you know what people know from before, because you are teaching this course, but also for people that in a conference, or if you go to give a seminar in another university, then you have to think, what do they know and what they don't know? So try to not use jargon, something that is very familiar for people, for example, who study foraging mode. You just tell them NPM, PTM. This is the basis of foraging mode science. So everybody knows what it is, but all the audience that is not learning or reading this literature has no clue about these letters, and they immediately forget what you're talking about when you use it so freely. And so if you are using abbreviation, try to avoid them if possible, try to write them, spell them out, or explain them more often. Make sure that people don't lose you on the way because you are using jargon, words that are known and familiar to your discipline, but people from outside this discipline, they will be lost. And another point is to use conversational style. You could notice, I hope, that the speaker in this sample talk was reading most of the slides word by word. And this is terrible, I would say. And it is really something that breaks the conversation with the people. and it is tiring to the listeners and not interesting, and the voice is not interesting, and so on. So it's better to use short headings. So instead of all these paragraphs that you see on top, you could change it into short sentences. They don't have to have a structure, correct, full grammatically structure. They're just headings, and then you develop the heading as you speak freely, and this is much more convenient for people to listen to conversational style and not to reading. Especially that in reading, we don't have the talent. For example, if you have the people reading the news on TV, they got training and experience of years to do it properly and correctly, intonation and so on. But we as scientists, as researchers, we don't have this training, and just reading text is terrible when it sounds from us. So it's better to speak freely. Of course, you need what you want to say. We're going to talk about it later, about the fear of forgetting. So short sentences, short headings are going to help you, direct you in the proper direction of what you wanted to say, and also help the listeners because they see the words, the main words that you are talking about. And again, they have this dual channel. Quotes, there's something that can be really terrible, like the example that I gave here. It's true that, for example, this example, what Charles Darwin said, obviously he used wonderful words and nobody could say it better. It's true, but you cannot torture the people to listen to such a long sentence. They lose you probably after the second line, and they don't get the whole idea, especially that you don't read it in the proper intonation. And so this is useless. It's better that you say it in your own word, much shorter. And you can mention that Charles Darwin talked about it already in 1859, but you don't have to quote him word by word. And if you think that you need to quote something, make sure that it's really short. 1 line, 1.5 line, okay, but this is trouble when it's so long. And the point that I really find so frustrating when I listen to our students and also to faculty members, that people, speakers, many speakers, I wouldn't say that all of them, but many speakers don't face the audience. And this, I think, it's so important because looking in the eyes of your audience, first of all, it gives you authority. This has been, it appears in essays and in articles and so on, but it gives you also credibility. You are able to monitor the reaction of people. You can see how looking at the phone at the same time, and it gives a personal touch to the listener. So the best is if you can move your eyes through the whole hall and give people the personal touch from time to time, all of them. And the use of the pointer, as I mentioned before, it gives people justification to look at the screen they're pointing at with the pointer instead of looking at the audience. Look, I want to acknowledge that it is sometimes frightening to look at the audience in the eyes. And I'm going to talk about it in a few minutes. But it's the solution of not looking at people and escaping from looking by pointing a lot to the screen is not a way to face it. You have to face the fear if you have it. We'll talk about it. But you have to try and look as much as possible in the eyes of the speakers. And this is a little study that I did in our seminar. I wrote myself a little application that I can, without losing eye contact with the speakers, monitor how much time they're looking at the screen and how much time they're looking at the audience. And then I average them for different classification of people, MSc students, PhD, and faculty, and so on. And you see that even faculty members who are supposed to be experienced, about 40% of the time, that's all they looked at the audience, 40%. It means that 60% of the time they were looking somewhere else, not at the audience. They were looking mostly at the screen. This is the most common thing that people do, looking at the screen. But some people look at the ceiling, some people look at the floor, and so on. And this is really losing the connection with the audience. And I really, you can see that some of the PhD students that gave seminars, some of them were really good, because you can see that the range of, there were some people who managed to almost 100% of the time looking at the audience. And you could see that the talk is so easy and flowing and nice and pleasant to listen, because they made all the time contact with people. Okay, so now I wonder how many points did you find? And did you find additional points that could be mentioned that I did not mention here? So maybe now we will spend a few minutes and you can add in your chat if you found additional points that I didn't relate to here. Remember your list that you were supposed to make when I showed the little video? So I'll be glad if people will write if they found additional points, if something disturbed them in the talk. And in general, if you can write how many points did you tick that you listed, I would be interested to know out of those that I mentioned here. Well, I don't know if you don't have anything to write or you're just not cooperative. And so I will continue next. Okay. So let's summarize. This is not a summary of the whole talk. It's summarizing the points that I wanted now to learn from this sample presentation. So we need to limit the information presented, remove irrelevant parts, minimize distractions, provide information by images and words, provide them simultaneously, organize in coherent structure, and integrate with prior knowledge, and use conversational style. A few additional points that I want to make. It goes without saying that you have to know your material. I'm not even mentioning it because you have to know what you're talking about, obviously. And usually you will know most of the people in more than most of the people in the audience, you will know your research material. And so you have to choose from all the knowledge that you know, which picture, graph, what are the main points. So it is very important that you know broadly, but you don't have to tell people everything. This is the point that you have to select, the most important part. And it is important that you know your presentation. Some people, they press the button and say, yes, I know this slide, yeah. But you have to know ahead of time, by training yourself, what is going to be your next slide. And then you can connect the last sentence from before to your next sentence later. Some people use what is called presenters mode in PowerPoint, which is very nice. Students like it very much, that while you are talking about one slide, you have on your screen at the side, you have the next slide, and also you can have some notes next to it. I like it because it forces people to look at the screen of the computer and the audience behind it instead of looking all the time back to the slides. But you have to know that there are sometimes some difficulties. You have to master the use of the presenter's mode, because, for some reason, one of my students gave a presentation, and for some reason, and she saw something on the screen, and on the screen in the back there was a different slide, and it was very disconcerting for her. And so you have to make sure that everything works ahead of time, and be sure that you master this nice tool. So you should know the order of the slides, and you know where it's going to end. And as I'm going to mention in a few minutes, you have to plan your time. And so that you know if you have to speed up, or you can slow down and relax if you have enough time. So this is very important to know. It's part of knowing your presentation. Some additional points that I thought that are important. I think that apologizing for something that is not so good in your presentation is really not helping you. So if there was a bad picture and you tell people, I am sorry for this picture, it happened because, it doesn't help. The picture is bad, people cannot get the information from it, and the apology is just distracting, not helping. I mean, I'm not against apologizing in general. If you have to apologize to your students, to your partner, that's wonderful, and it's sometimes very much needed. But in a presentation, make your presentation as best as you can. Okay, sometimes I'm really frustrated that I cannot find a good picture that I really remember that I had, and I have to put a second-class picture. So if it's good enough, I will put it, but I will not apologize and say, oh, I'm sorry, I have this lousy picture because I had it much better. It doesn't help. Most people maybe don't even see the problem that you're going to apologize about. So why emphasize it and put the big flag? Because it even doesn't help them to absorb better when you apologize. The next point is something that some people find it very difficult, and often they speak, and while they're trying to think what they're doing, what they're going to say next, then they say or ah, or whatever sound they're used to. It can be so annoying to this listener, to the students. I remember myself as a student making a list of how many hundreds times the teacher used to say this or ah, and so on. It's okay to think before the next slide, but trying to train yourself just to think quietly. There's nothing wrong with standing for a few milliseconds or even seconds quietly and not saying anything. People absorb. It's much more convenient for people to listen to silence and to listen to every now and then. Another point that I don't know if you noticed in the video, there was one point where the speaker was standing like this, leaning on a chair, and it happens often. People sometimes stand near the podium and they hold it and so on. It limits the way that you can talk, converse freely. And so I suggested to try to be conscious about it, not put your hands in the pockets, not to put the hands on the computer, on the table, on the desk, on anything. Just keep your hands alive, like normally you would take in a normal conversation. It is much easier to people to listen to a normal conversation. And this is, by the way, why when I give my talks, my Zoom lectures, I promise not to talk about Zoom, but this comment I have to say, that I find it easier for me to stand. I'm now standing in front of a computer because then I have much more free with my hands than when I sit on a desk and they just see my head and nothing moves around. So this is just my adaptation to Zoom, to give a presentation. So a few tips that I think that may concern some people. So the problem with timing is very important. Especially it is important when you have a conference, 12 minutes for presenting your presentation and then 3 minutes for questions, and that's it. And sometimes people keep talking and talking over the whole 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, they're kicked out of the stage and they didn't reach the stage where they gave the conclusions nicely, or when they wanted to answer questions, and some people may interpret it that they did it on purpose to avoid the questions. Maybe they were afraid from talking freely and so on. So it's not a good idea to not leave time for questions. You should face the question and answer them as best as you can, and not be afraid from them. So you have to plan your time properly. And then the next point that I'm going to expand a little bit is about what to do when the audience is falling asleep and how to deal with nervousness. So let's talk with improving time. And so first of all, one solution that many people will tell you is practice in front of audience. So take the lab members, take your family, take some random people in the corridor and give them your lecture. I wrote a little squiggle next to it because it's not 100%. because often when you give the talk in the real life, in real situation, you're more nervous, and then the timing might be different. It can be faster, or it can be slower, depending on your character and how you react to stress and so on. So don't count on the practice talks that it will be exactly the same time in the real life. So I suggest that people have to try and expand or shorten as you talk, because according to my style, you don't have full sentences. You expand short sentences, then you can expand them wider, or you can be brief and just say this sentence, one sentence out of it, and so on. But on other occasions, we may expand and expand. And the worst is when your time is short and the moderator is telling you, okay, you have to speed up and so on. And then you say, okay, this I'm not going to talk, I'm not going to talk. It's really not respectful to the audience that you have to skip slides like this. It's not productive if you're talking fast, as in the sample talks that are reading fast. So what I suggest to do is to have escape routes in certain critical points of the talk, and especially towards the end. And I usually always actually try to look at the clock all the time while I'm talking. Even now, as I'm talking, I have a clock here next to me, and all the time I keep an eye on this from time to time. I don't like to do this because everybody sees that I'm watching the watch, but you didn't notice, I think, that from time to time I watch my clock here, and then I could plan ahead. And if I notice that I have a short time, I will not have enough time to reach peacefully to the conclusion, I have escape routes. You see, for example, this arrow here, I press it, and it brings me to the next slide. You don't know how many slides I skip now, do you? But I can plan it so that I know I have certain slides are not so important, and then I will decide to skip them. So this is very simple, and it is done as part of the PowerPoint. It has this feature that you have insert, instead of, you can insert circles and bubbles and all kinds of, and arrows and so on, but you can also insert an action button, it's called, and it can send you to another slide, and you can have several of those, and you can use some, not use others, and nobody knows. But for them, it's a complete lecture because you plan them ahead of time what to do if suddenly you don't have enough time. Okay, what to do with the audience that is falling asleep? Well, first of all, you have to know that if you are lecturing in a dark room, then it's against you. The darkness of the room and melatonin in the brain and all these are acting against you, and people are more likely to fall asleep even if you are not boring. So, and the fact that people sometimes use this style of slides that have a dark background, in some conferences I see people have the whole background is black and the writing is in white, and it makes the room even darker than it would have been if you had white background. So I always suggest to have white background, because you cannot manipulate the light in the room. This is the given. If you are going to give a seminar at a different university, they're not going to change the light for you. They have a certain hall and they have a certain amount of light, which could be good or it could be too dark. So by having the screen at least light, you add a little bit light in the room. And most important, if you talk to the audience and adjust yourself to the people, you look at them, you see they're falling asleep, then you can from time to time say something much more powerful and wake them up and so on. And this can help in avoiding. Last point I want to say, don't take it personally. If you have sometimes one or two people, a few people falling asleep in front of your face, that's okay. Maybe they didn't sleep the whole night before. Maybe they have narcolepsy, or I don't know, all kinds of things that can cause them to fall asleep. So you don't have to feel bad from the fact that people fall asleep in your talk. It's just if half of the hall is falling asleep, then you have to be concerned. Now, the main issue that many people feel that they are too nervous. I remember going to a conference talking with a colleague that I knew from the literature, and she was almost close to retirement, and I saw her before her talk, going over her talk and repeating it and learning it by heart, and she was so nervous. I couldn't believe that a person at this age can still be so nervous after so many years. It's obvious that young people have this problem, but some people persist and have this problem of nervousness before the audience. So let's see how we can minimize a little bit or easy. So what are we afraid of? Why are we too nervous? Failure, we were afraid that somehow our talk is going to be bad. Or the worst, that we're going to have a blackout. Suddenly we stand in front of all this audience, everybody is watching us, and we don't remember what we wanted to say in the next sentence. It's terrible, right? So you shouldn't be so nervous if you have prepared your talk properly. So if you have, in a conversational style and not trying to learn by heart the whole talk, then nothing wrong can happen, because you always have these short sentences and you can expand them. All you have to make sure when you write the sentences to write them in such a way that you know what they're going to be. I remember that sometimes I have certain words that I know that I have a blackout on this specific word sometimes. So I make sure that it appears in my short sentences so that it will remind me of this word that I know that slips my mind for some reason. And so by not trying to learn by heart, then you can relax a lot. Okay, so this is, I'm talking to you in logic, but sometimes logic doesn't help. So you know you have no reason to be nervous. You know that you know the material, you've prepared properly the slides and you've written the right sentences. Still, you come to the stage and you feel your legs are trembling and your voice is shivering. What can you do at this stage? So while you're sitting and before you've been called to come and present your presentation, try to take 3 deep breaths. You wouldn't believe how much it helps. Another trick is to contract all your muscles and then relax them. All these are tricks that are taken from other disciplines, yoga and so on, and they can help you to relax. And you also have to remember that even though you feel that you are so nervous and so trembling, you have to know that people can see maximum 10% of your nervousness. So they might see that you are nervous, but you feel your legs are shaking and you get nervous because you think that people see you nervous. So relax. You are nervous, okay, we're trying to deal with it, but don't add to this the nervousness from what people will think when they see me nervous. And remember that I told you that I suggest to people to watch over the whole hall from time to time and pass your gaze from side to side to give people the feeling of personal talk to them. But sometimes this may make the speaker nervous. If they are nervous, going over all the faces can make them nervous. So what I suggest to my students sometimes is to find 1 or 2 people, better 2 people on different sides of the hall that I would call friendly faces, even let's say that you know them and they are your friends or your supervisor, and you know that you can look at them and get reassurance from them. Then you just look from one to the other, then back to the one to the other. All the rest in the middle, they have the feeling that you are scanning them. Actually, you are just going for those 2 people. And if you go to the audience where you don't know anybody, then choose 2 people that seem to you optimistic, smiling, and so on, something that can give you a good feeling, and stick to their faces. And if you feel scared from scanning all the rest of the audience, it helps a lot if you are very nervous to stop and drink a sip of water. The reason it happens, the reason I think it's very useful, is that sometimes when you're nervous, you feel out of air because you're so nervous, you're talking out of nervousness, and you don't have air to bring in because of your nervousness. When you are drinking water it settles your breathing, you can breathe deeply between sips, and it's legitimate. Everybody knows that when people are talking, the mouth gets dry, and it's totally legitimate in all conferences or talks or seminars that I've been, that people drink water. It could be a cup, it could be a bottle, it doesn't matter, but it's an opportunity to arrange, to reset your breathing, deep, breathely, drink, and continue much calmer than before. So the last tip that I'm going to give you before concluding is that you can learn and improve from every talk that you give. You can sit afterwards and analyze, okay, what did I like about my talk? What I didn't like about it? Could I structure my talk differently ahead of time so that it will be better presented next time? And so on. But you can learn a lot from listening to other people and thinking, oh, wow, this is terrible. What are you doing here? Or this is wonderful, what I heard she was doing. So let's absorb the good thing from the talk that you hear and try to avoid the thing that annoyed you and gave you the feeling that it's annoying when you hear such things. And I'm really, I have to acknowledge that many of the ideas that I mentioned here, I learned them from lots of talks that I heard. And some of the talks were good, and some of them were very hard to follow. But as I said, you can learn a lot from them. Thank you, and I will be very glad to answer questions if you have.
Please. Maybe you can stop and share so we can see you and all the others. And I invite you to ask both in the text and face-to-face, just to come into the discussion.
Okay, I see in the chat people provide additional suggestion. Somebody suggested to take a coffee before giving a talk, and also gives you time to think of an answer to a question. Okay. Okay, so I see now that I didn't notice before that there were some suggestions when I asked for them to give feedback. And so now some people wrote some useful things that I spoke very quickly in the example. Yes, of course. And it was an example that people, when they are nervous, they talk very fast. And there was no contact eye with the audience, right? And people wrote that all the points that they wrote, they were mentioned. Okay, good. I'm glad that there was some feedback, which I didn't notice before. And now you are free to answer. Just open your microphone and ask your question if you have any questions.
I'd like to add something, Amos, if
yes?
I may. My best presentation was when I was young, and I prepared it. I think I captured the attention of the public. This was my kind of after the postdoc, and I also remember my first public presentation. This was in the 5th grade, yeah, and it was excellent. But why? Because I prepared. Then it's when you succeed a little bit, so it's very hard to continue and to prepare at the same serious manner when you don't have to lose. Yeah, why are you doing the presentation? How much time you invest in it? I think this is very, very important. So I don't know if you raised it, but I'd like to bring myself here on that.
Yeah, preparation is really important, and some people are still nervous even though they have prepared it. And the nervousness gives them a bad performance. But I think that if they consider it coolly and they know that they are the expert of this topic and they know they have prepared it, as you said before, ahead of time, then they can relax. They can be confident with themselves, and it can help.
Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So first of all, thank you very much for this talk. The tips are very useful. I wanted to ask, what is your take on presentations without a slideshow? What do you think is better, both as a presenter and as a listener?
Wait, I'm not sure I understand what you mean without this. You mean if
some people present without a PPT, a presentation, just especially now on Zoom, but sometimes in person too, just talk without slides.
Yeah, I briefly mentioned it. I've attended a few talks like this, especially, I don't remember if it was in literature or something like this, and the speaker was wonderful and I liked the topic. And some people, like, I don't know if you heard Meir Shalev giving talks about his books. He's wonderful, he can talk without anything in the background because his language is so alive. You can see the scenes in his book. But most people, that's my impression, and I have to say, it's not based on studies. My impression, it is much more difficult to focus when there are no slides and so on. So, of course, you have to think what you are presenting. I have heard people who are excellent speakers, but their slides were so cluttered, so much text was in it that it's make it difficult. So, obviously, you can kill your talk with overwriting on the slides. So I'm not saying any slides will do, but if you can have slides that are properly managed and not too much information, I think that will help the audience absorbing the material. Yes, Nili?
I was wondering if you can offer any tips for with respect to quotes. So I'm a qualitative researcher, and sometimes in the course of a presentation, the quotations from the participants are my data. And it's hard because on the one hand, you want to show their words. On the other hand, you end up with huge blocks of text on the slide. But it's not like...
Yeah, well, you have to really consider, is it really so important to hear them word by word? Even if, as I said, it's possible that their words were the best, but sometimes it is so difficult to listen to something quoted when it is long, that I would say that it's better to bring it to your words if it's a bit longer than 2 lines or something. Did I answer your question?
But that's my data.
Okay, so now I understand. So you must find the balance. You must find the balance not to kill the listeners and still give them the evidence that you need. Of course, you have to realize I'm talking from I'm an ecologist, biologist. I listen sometimes to talk from other disciplines. I even have a student from social sciences that we collaborate. But it is possible that there are certain disciplines that you have to quote. And I just think, try to make it easy for people to absorb. You have to, okay, try to make it easy for people to listen to it.
A few words of conclusions, Amos, perhaps, or?
Yes, I would say that talking in public is part of our profession. We cannot avoid it. Any part of any scientific, and it doesn't matter if it's social sciences or if it's exact sciences, we have to overcome this difficulty. It will come to you sooner or later. So the better is to be equipped from the beginning, not to be afraid from it, and to see that you can be proud of your presentations if they're well planned and properly adjusted with time. And I think the flexibility is what I find the most important, that you can be flexible during the talk. You are thinking about your time, about how you view the audience, and you adjust yourself, not that you're stuck to one square.
Yeah. I would add one more thing on basis of my experience. When it goes well, you remember it for life. And I mentioned two events that I remember where the presentation went well. So we conclude here. Thank you very much, Professor Amos Bouskila. It's our pleasure to have you now for the second time, I think. And we appreciate very much your contribution. Thank you very much to you, Amos, and to all.
Thank you.
תודה רבה.
תודה רבה.
Bye-bye.